Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Well, thank you very much. That was very good, and I hope you're all ready for what I think is going to be a very exciting episode. This is the KAKT American Knowledge Team meeting. And as we've said, what makes this meeting so powerful is the appearance of those not from the American Knowledge Team meeting. In other words, from the other continents around the world. So welcome everybody, because this is a worldwide event. And sometimes when you have an event, you have to set a schedule, right? This is when everybody comes together. Well, there is no timetable, there is no deadline, there is no schedule. This is the way life is, has always been, and will be in the future, because the Earth space community wants to join the universal community. That's what this is all about, isn't it? We are in the post-Sanya conference era. And as you can see, there's enough gold for everybody to go around. So what are we fighting for? This is the KAKT Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. We are in the Intermediate Transition series. Today's discussion will be on perspective. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is June the 9th, the year 2024. This is the KAKT Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So this is an ongoing series that we started years ago, and this gives you kind of a rundown if you want to review. We're trying to condense the thousands and thousands of hours of teaching over 10 years of weekly lectures in the Knowledge Seekers Workshop. And we understand that there's a vast majority of people who've never heard of the foundation or the plasma science, but everyone agrees there's something going on in the background. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about, because this transition deals with the y-axis polarity, and we'd like to get a little perspective on what's going on here, won't we? Because we're in the hesitancy highway, unfortunately, which is the lowest energy state, and we understand how life is very hard. This is why we always say it gets easier when you get up on the horse, but you've got to pick the winning horse, because otherwise it could be a bumpy ride. And then, of course, as always, whether you're on the horse or not on the horse, you've got to keep things in perspective. And that's where the difficulty and the challenge comes in. So this has been outlined in the books by Maranteva Kolikash in book number 1, The Universal Order of the Creation of Matter. Imagine going through life and not understanding how that is done. And furthermore, in book number 2, The Structure of the Light. And does light have structure? And then book number 3, The Origin of the Universe. Oh yeah, that thing. That thing, like where we came from, and we always thought it was just a glint in Daddy's eye. But what is the problem on this planet? We don't act as one planet, one nation, and one race for justice, and we're trying every Tuesday, 329 weeks in a row, to bring world peace, because that's fundamental. That's fundamental in our search for outer space, because man has never been in outer space, not the way we've been doing it. And we have to do that to get on the plasma highway. And we ask ourselves the question, are we passing by, or is it just pie in the sky? That plasma highway, are we there? Well, no, we're still groveling on the transmission highway, the waveform. And how do we get there? Well, this is what we're discussing, the transition highway. How do we get from here to there? And so when we look at our little piece of pie in the sky and we say, well, we can create a MAGRAPH pie chart, but there's a lot of things that aren't answered here. So when we think of speed of light, and is that the constant transmission? And is that a symbol of truth? Or is the universe 70% hydrogen? Or is this a thimble of truth? And why a thimble? Because we have to identify if you are here or if you are here. So I ask you to show me the electron map. And a famous scientist, Richard Feynman, was talking about the groundbreaking research on quantum electrodynamics, the theory that describes the interaction between light and matter. And of course, he said that there's enough power in a thimble to power this earth. It's an amazing statement coming from a NASA scientist and a Nobel laureate, because he once said that if two persons stood at arm's length from each other and each person had more electrons than protons, the force of repulsion between them would be enough to lift a weight equal to that of the entire Earth. It hasn't happened for me, but we keep reaching out. And then, of course, he later proposed this interpretation of the positron, which is an electron moving backwards in time. And another scientist, Yoshiro Anambu, applied it to all production and annihilation of particle-antiparticle pairs, stating that the eventual creation and annihilation of pairs that may occur now and then is no creation nor annihilation, but only a change of directions of moving particles from past to future or from future to past. Isn't that interesting? So in the plasma science, we're discussing how two forces come together, and we see the y-axis and x-axis dimension coming together for those two forces. And for some people, this is a point of conflict. But the resolution to this conflict becomes a point of containment. And this containment is essential because of the energy binding characteristic of it. We all need to be self-serving to maintain that binding energy. But we've learned how to do it at the expense of others. And this becomes a problem because others need that binding energy as well for their self-serving purposes. So where did we go wrong? Well, we went wrong in the plasma rule, where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. So these energies coming together create this conflict point. And when we talk about the electron fixation, it's part of the negative charge principle. but it's misunderstood because when we say the negative gives and the positive takes, we have to understand that the energy can be flowing or it can be binding. So it has to be both. So we just haven't said gives to whom and takes from where. And so as we're discussing this terminology, it's very important for us to understand that the fundamental terminology of the transmission, transition, and transmutation aligns itself with the X, Y, and Z axis, which aligns itself with the rotation, polarity, and field strength. But now we are, as we are saying, unraveling things, we find that part of the transmission dimension involves the transition dimension. And each dimension has its own transition dimension. So the x-axis has both the transmission and transition dimension, but interestingly, so does the y-axis. And so that's what we're discussing today, the y-axis transition. So is it time for a coffee break or is it time for a jailbreak? Well, as I said, it's hard to go through life without understanding the creation of the universe. So you say, how is the universe created? And we say it exists from energy. And as that scientist said, it has to do with motion, forward and backward. So energy is always positive. So that charge on the energy is the direction of motion. And if there's a motion, then there's a to going to and a coming from. And so in that basis, all things are working in combination. So do we understand what is the combination? So this is why we were talking about perspective today, because we understand the gravitational conformation of the hydrogen spectrum. We understand it comes from the interaction with the gravitational field and magnetical field that is given off by the interaction of the gravitational field of the sun interacting with the gravitational field of the earth. So we have the gravitational realization of the hydrogen. And so that's the principal matter that's coming together from all sides. And it comes as an energy pack, as an energy parceling unit. But the principal interaction, since it's energy in motion, is a two-way street. So that means not only is it a two-way transmission, but as we said, it's a two-way transition as well. So when we talk about an energy pack, what do we pack that in? So a good way to pack it is in a parcel. So an energy pack and an energy parceling unit are kind of two of the same thing. And so when we look at water and we see that the water adding the oxygen to the hydrogen as an H2O becomes a maggrav, and the maggrav is round. So the maggrav is the balance between the magnetical gravitational field forces, and yet the balance between the hydrogen and oxygen doesn't look very balanced to me, because the hydrogen has a mass of 2 and the oxygen has a mass of 8, and that's not very balanced. And yet the maggrav is very round. Isn't it interesting how we can parcel this energy? And so it strains our understanding of relationships, this balance between the magnetical gravitational field forces of a maggrav condition. And so scientifically speaking, we're trying to understand how this energy in motion is always working by balancing between the conservation of magnetic fields and the conservation of energy. But spiritually speaking, then we're seeing the difference between the spirit and the soul and trying to understand how the spirit is the motor of the soul. And so these 2 points of conflict, or these 2 points of view, or these 2 points of containment require a combination. This is where the plasma science adds to the knowledge. So when we're looking at the conservation of energy, we have to understand that the law of conservation of energy extends into this field of energy, where energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It can only be converted from one form of energy to another. And so in that aspect, it is true. And so we have a balance between what we call the initial kinetic energy and initial potential energy, and the final kinetic energy and the final potential energy. And so these energies are variable, and yet the formula maintains its balance. So that balance is reflected in the potentiation of strength. So when we look at the pH table, we see that the stronger feeds the weaker, the initial potential is stronger, the final potential is weaker. So this is the transfer of energy from a complex structure to a simple structure. In other words, from a gravitational to magnetical structure. But there are all these points in between. And how do we determine the susceptibility of those points? And maybe we'll shed a little bit of light on that today, because there are sequence orders. So when we're talking about the attraction, this is a gravitational feedback. And we're talking about repulsion, this is a magnetical feeding. And so the feeding and the feedback are working together. And this is how we, as the last man standing, has choices. And man can either turn off or turn on the feeding, or increase or decrease his strength, or enhance or diminish the positioning. And this is how the stronger feeds the weaker. And we are the ones making that choice. So that field that we are capturing is not just based on the x-axis transition, which is perpendicular to the ground, and the combination of the y-axis transition, which is elevation above the ground, but we can affect the field capture, and we can affect the difference in the position. And so that becomes something for us to understand, because when we're looking at the way that the Earth rotates, we see that its rotation is going around the equator. We call that the x-axis. It rotates around its pole, so we call that the y-axis. And that's what we're discussing now, is the y-axis dimension by polarity. And then, of course, there's this movement where we go from here to there. And there are various planes that we can move from. So how does that change with respect to our perspective? Well, interestingly enough, this week we had a planetary alignment. But, when we say a planetary alignment, and here we are looking at this alignment, we have to assume that there's a line that runs from Jupiter to Saturn, and that all of these planets are on that line, as if it was a graph, as if it were an accounting graph. But our point of view here is not from the point of alignment, it's from the side. And so when we look at this alignment, the question is it alphabetical? Or is it by a sequential number? In other words, our planet is the third rock from the sun. Is it by size? Jupiter is the largest? Or is it by another point of view? Maybe the MAGRAV pie chart is not the answer. Maybe it's a muffin chart. And so when we look at the historical references of the expanding universe, and here from the University of Chicago, we see that if we put blueberries in a muffin batter, and we call the muffin batter the universe, and each of these blueberries is a position, and there we are, one of these blueberries, and we bake it for 15 minutes, the muffin will expand everywhere. and the blueberries will move apart. So over time, we get further away from other galaxies. So much for the thimble. We call this the Hubble effect. Hubble's law explains that the reason most galaxies are moving away from one another is because the whole universe is expanding. So pick any two galaxies, and they're moving away from each other. So how do we determine how they're moving away? Well, Hubble's law, which was simply that the galaxy's velocity, or as is sometimes plotted on a chart, its redshift, is directly proportional to its distance. Oh, here we go. And so that tells us something important about the state of the universe. So the redshift is a key concept for astronomers. The term usually is understood and literally is the wavelength of light that gets stretched. The wavelength of the light is stretched, so the light is seen as shifted towards the red part of the spectrum. Similar things happen to sound waves, right? So when the source of a sound moves relative to an observer. So the Hubble's constant is trying to determine is how far and how fast these blueberries expand. What is the rate that this is happening? But another interesting thing is distant galaxies move away faster than nearby galaxies. So the galaxies in the background are moving away faster than the nearby galaxies. And the Hubble constant tells us the rate at which this is happening. So when we're talking about light and how the nearer it gets, we look at a relationship which we call the inverse square law, which actually measures the relationship between distance versus intensity. In other words, if we double the distance, the intensity is cut by half, which means that the light coming from the source has the highest intensity, where the light at the destination is the lowest intensity. So I have to keep that in mind, because this is what we're talking about, the Doppler effect, which is an extension of this effect. The recession velocity can be measured by taking advantage of a phenomenon called the Doppler effect. And a classic example is how the sound of a siren changes as an ambulance passes by. This is because the sound waves moving between you and the ambulance are compressed, not stretched. Compressed as the ambulance approaches, essentially catching up to its own sound waves. But it's stretched as it races away. Oh, here we go. Okay. And so the same thing can happen to light. So the light from the stars and galaxies moving away from Earth is stretched out in the same way as a siren sound from the ambulance, increasing the wavelength of the light. Astronomers call this the red shift. Isn't it interesting that an ambulance is used in this example? Because when we look at the relationship of the wavelength and frequency of light, if we were to stretch the wavelength, in other words, if we stretch the wavelength from 380 nanometers to 750, we find that the frequency will be reduced. In other words, going towards the red. But if the ambulance is turning on that siren, that siren makes a sound, and that sound has a frequency. And so we don't notice it because the sound frequency changes. The ambulance sound is distinctive. But what would happen if the ambulance sound was just a horn? Just one constant horn. No change in frequency. And so as the ambulance approaches with no change in frequency and the wavelength compresses, well, that isn't going to work. And then as the ambulance goes away, the wavelength will stretch and the frequency is not going to change. So that's not going to work. So we have some issues. So let's look at this perspective of hydrogen in a little bit different light, you see here, because if we say that an alkaline pH is healthy and an acidic pH is unhealthy, and we see that there's a color association, which goes from the blue shift to the red shift, the blue being stable and the red being unstable. Stable, of course, means it's more complex. And of course, it's gravitational. So the simple becomes more magnetical. And we relate this to health. We're talking about ambulances, right? And so we see that in the DNA transcription, as we stretch the wavelength of the DNA structure, we become more unhealthy. In other words, we become more acidic. And if we stretch it far enough, well, then it becomes anaerobic, dead, in other words. So this is the future as we are expanding the universe. The universe is on the road to flatlining, isn't it? According to that description. So what we're talking about is the y-axis transmission, because when we look at this simulation of a wave, you have to look at, even though the picture's a little bit out of focus, notice that there is a wave pattern on the side here, and there's a white ball that is in there. And if we move this, we find that the ping pong ball sits in this wave. And the wave moves the ball and moves it all the way to the end. And then it gets to the end of the road, and then, we fall off the flat earth. Well, let's get rid of the wave and see what's behind the wave. Oh, yes, we're talking about the y-axis transition. Okay, so there was a vertical wave transportation system that was created by this y-axis transition. Well, let's follow this again. So here we go. And we see that this vertical wave moves along. And it keeps on moving. And then it too reaches the end of the road and falls off the edge. So this is the whole point of the potentiation of hydrogen, to go from this gravitational to this magnetical pH scale. But there are all these points in between, as we discussed. And, what determines the susceptibility of that? So the whole scale is actually a density range, right? And if we were to add the field from the acid plus the alkaline, it would always give us a total of 14. That's kind of the rule. And so we see the difference where acid is oily and alkaline is wet. Well, that makes sense because oil and water don't come together. But the fact is that gravity seeks density, and oxygen is more dense than hydrogen. And so this is one of the reasons why the pH scale involves water, because hydrogen and oxygen are the universal solvents on this earth. And if you were to split up that pH and you take the residual pHs of the two splits and add them together, they would always total 14. And that's the rule. So the potentiation of hydrogen is kind of like a zipper, and it's aligned itself as neutral. That's what we call neutral. We don't know if it's acidic or alkaline, but 7 alone doesn't total 14. So if we were looking at the potential, which is what the potentiation of hydrogen is, it means there's a potential to be acidic and a potential to be alkaline, and that potential is sitting at its neutral potential. So 7 plus 7 is 14, even though it's neutral. So when we shear off a hydrogen on one side, we create a hydroxyl on the other side. So the hydrogen is a positive looking for a home, and the hydroxyl is now a negative looking for a home because it's lost that positive hydrogen. And so this is how an energy pack is created. And it's energy in always in motion, because when there was an electron shearing, now you had to have this splitting. And in turn, you get a crossover deflection or twisting, which involves a tightening, coiling, and tunneling. And this always facilitates energy in motion. And we see this in the processing of sugar energy, where we have the hexagonal structure, which is gravitational, and the pentagonal structure, which is magnetical. And the difference in the two structures causes this twisting susceptibility that we keep talking about. And we've seen this process in the cups of life. We started with the physical cups of life, and we created this GANS. And in between, we had this nanocoating process, which is part of the monatomic science. And then through this inner space emotional strength, we created this GANS. And so the cup of life had this GANS radiance manifestation. We've seen the CO2, the calcium, the zinc, the copper, the H2O, and the amino acid. But, in the periodic table of elements, there's other elements, including gold. And so we can produce GANs. And so we change the nature of the cup of life. So we looked at just two cups of life, the emotional first cup and the physical second cup, and we've seen the relationship of it. But then when we look at the periodic table of elements, we say, well, wait a moment. We have this Earth space range and all the details of that range. So, we started with hydrogen, and then we ended up with all of these other things, including the amino acids, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen combination, the sodium, magnesium, potassium, calcium solutions, and then, of course, the manifestation of the iron, the gold, the copper, the zinc. And we did this all on our planet, which is based on silicon and sulfur. So as I said, this Y transition and how we created this is like a zipper. And when you split these elements apart, you create one, you create the other. And that is mandatory. If you have a pH of 4, the opposite is 10. You can't create one without the other. If you create 5, you will create 9. If you create 6, you'll create 8. That is the nature of the electrolytic breakup of water. That's what you get. So in a sense, in a way, this becomes kind of a transition. and then manifests itself as a transmission. But how do you go from one pH to another? How do we make that pH transition? All we're talking about is the y-axis transition. How do we get that wave moving? And what is that wave? So one of the things that we discussed last week was the y-axis transition dimension. And so we see that in the atomic physicality, we have the nanocoding, which is monatomic, and that is physical. So that is a higher field strength than the basic x-axis transmission. And then we had the Gans transition, which is higher still, but it's still physical. But something is missing. Something is missing that accounts for the different Ganses. Something is missing that accounts for the different monatomic structures. Something is missing in the atomic physicality because we know it's there. So it's Sunday afternoon, and I think let's talk about transportation. So I'm going for a drive in the country. Okay, so we'll see you later. I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to drive away. And as I leave, my perspective of you is I'm passing by you, so I'll see you later. Well, remember the galaxies in the distance moving away faster than the galaxies nearby? Have you ever been a passenger in a car? And this is the North American class, so we drive on the right-hand side of the road. So the passenger is on the right-hand side. You look out the window and what do you see? I am passing by you. And I can see those in the background. And the thing is, the one in the front, the one near me, is going away faster. It's going away faster than all the others in the background, but the perspective is wrong. Let's see if we can make an adjustment. Oh yeah, that's a little bit better, right? Because the farther away you are, the smaller you are, right? So we're assuming that everything's in alignment and everything's of the same size. So to enhance the perspective, we have to make that adjustment. But I am further down the road, and of course you are farther away. And I see those in the background better because I have a different point of view now, but still the perspective is wrong. So here, maybe this is a little bit better, but it's still wrong. Let's try something else. Oh, yes, this is better. But it's still wrong, isn't it? Because everybody's the same size, kind of. So, oh, yes, this is better. Yeah, but still wrong. So let's change the perspective again. Almost there, but it can be a little bit better. Okay, I think we got it. And so what do we see here? As we're driving along, those objects that are nearer are going faster away than those objects in the distance. So much so that the mountains in the background aren't moving at all. And yet I'm on the highway moving at 100 kilometers an hour because I am obeying the speed limit. So what we're talking about is the redshift perspective, where the background has no movement or lacks movement. My car movement is going in one direction, but the foreground objects are moving in the opposite direction. And they are moving at different rates of speed. Now, I am moving at one speed. All these other objects are moving at different speeds. What about the Earth perspective? Let's look at this planetary alignment again. So we talked about overlapping fields, didn't we? Because from our perspective, the Jupiter is the largest. Mercury is the smallest. Uranus and Neptune are pretty much the same. Mars is, well, it's kind of the size of Earth, but from our perspective, Mars is far away, so we're bigger. And then, of course, there's Saturn. We see the rings around Saturn. But what if we just did it by size perspective? In other words, Mercury being the smallest, and then Mars is next, Uranus and Neptune, Saturn, and then Jupiter. Well, that could be one perspective. Or how about the plasmatic perspective, where the car movement direction is gravitational and the foreground object movement is magnetical. And we're just assuming that things are all aligned. So this would be one of the plasmatic perspectives, wouldn't it? And so maybe what we're talking about is the pH of motion. So when we talked about pH, we said the water splitting is always 14. Okay. So if we say that the car movement is gravitational, and I am driving on the highway at 100 kilometers per hour, the foreground objects are moving away from me at 100 kilometers per hour. But they're not moving. I'm moving. They're moving in relationship to me. I'm the one who's moving. So if I dictate a pH of 9 and I'm moving, the foreground objects would be at a pH of 5. 9 and 5 is 14. But the movement perspective is undecided, because you could say that I'm standing still and the objects in the foreground are moving. This is how they did movie productions in the past. Where the rider sits on the horse, that horse, and he's not moving, but they're shaking the horse. And other people on the studio set are moving all the plants and the mountains and everything to give an indication of how everything is moving. But of course, the background is not moving. It's just the foreground that is moving. And so you look at that picture and I say, well, it looks to me like the car is moving. but in the movie studio, the foreground is moving. So clearly, the balance of power sits elsewhere. So what we're talking about maybe is a plasma shift. And we say, well, wait a second. The higher strength is gravitational and the plasma state is gravitational. And so we've seen the plasma shift to the GAN state, to the nano state, to the matter state, the small m matter state. And we see the transfer rate and transfer state manifested heat and electricity, that being magnetical, the lowest energy. So let's look at the pH of perspective. As we look at this scale, the susceptibility changes from nearness to farness, from being near and more intense to being far and less intense. So that being the difference between the blue shift frequency and the red shift frequency, isn't it? So the blue shift is more stable, the red shift being more unstable as the universe is expanding. And of course, the more stable it is, the more complex it is. So as we get farther away from the stability, we become more simple. So that makes the gravitational have more mass and more volume, like Jupiter. And the magnetic will have less mass and less volume, like Mercury. But Mercury is closer to the sun. And the sun is the source of energy for our solar system. How could this small planet be in that gravitational position? So if the sun is the source, then we could say that all the other planets are the destination. But which pH or perspective are we talking about? So what we now need to understand is the gravitational confirmation. That destination would be our gravitational destination. And just like this Earth is our gravitational destination at this point in time. But remember that we are the third rock from the sun, and Mercury is the first rock from the sun. And we didn't gravitate to Mercury. And we didn't gravitate to Mars. We gravitated to Earth. And so the Earth becomes very important for us because it gives us the feedback that we need. And so every time we look at this perspective, we take into account the sound, the light, the heat, the pressure, the light luster, how good things look. And we focus on the superficiality, not the substance. But we see that there's different levels. There's different level laminar containment. And the x-axis transmission dimension goes through a lot of transition. But it's the dominance of man-made range deviation that takes hold, because we call that the conscious awareness, and it overrides the unconscious awareness. So the y-axis transition dimension is exposed, isn't it? And the transmission spectrum this non-visible, what we call viral spectrum orbitals, these overlapping fields, is the transition of visible transmission spectrums, isn't it? From spectrum to spectrum, and there's a susceptibility. So we're looking at the difference between the surface superficiality and the internal substance, the physical surface, the plasma substrate. And we see that the plasma substrate and the combination with the physicality is the point of containment. And yet we look at the physicality as gravitational and the plasma as magnetical. Because when we look at the magnetical wave, oh, it's stretching out. And when we look at the gravitational wave, oh, it's compressing. So when that ambulance is coming, it is compressing the wave, but the frequency of the horn doesn't change. And yet when an ambulance is leaving, the wave stretches, but the frequency of the horn doesn't change. And where we are and whatever we hear, part of the visible, audible, touchy-feely point of view is our point of containment. So we have to understand that there is one step beyond what we're seeing in the gravitational realm and one step beyond what we're seeing in the magnetical realm. We have to take that into account, don't we? So this is the y-axis transition dimension. And our communication antenna has to stay within this range transition. So the release of the binding energy has to precede the retrieval of the beneficial energy. The field release has to precede the field capture. The giving has to precede the taking, and the emission precedes the absorption. This is where the balance comes in. So the motion cannot exist without the coexistence, because motion is a product of existence. So motion and coexistence reside in both matter states. So there has to be a tuning, a plasma dominant tuning, and a physical dominant tuning. And the range transition by nearness and proximity is what facilitates the tuning, and not distance. So the y-axis transition dimension is not man-space centric, and it's not even Earth space centric. It could be sun space centric. But one of the things for sure is that the containment is dimension centric, and proximity is part of that dimension, and the nature of pressure is dimension centric. But there's 3 transmission dimensions, and on those dimensions there's a message. And how is that message contained? And which transmission dimension? And we call it the folding deviation, where the accountability is in both X and Y axis range transition and is dependent on the point at the center. And so that point becomes your target point, the reality dimension, where we're targeting our gravitational Earth space and the magnetical some place in outer space. And that's what we're targeting. But we're in the matter plasma dimension. And the difference being the physical can touch it, and the plasmatic, you can't. And we still remain in the feedback dominant state, which we call the physical state. So where do we get this? If I am on 1 pH scale and I choose 9, and I'm the one who's moving, and the one who's not moving is in a physical stationary state at a pH of 5. Where is this message feeding manifestation coming from? And how are we getting this message feedback manifestation? So this transmission becomes part of the tuning of the transition, where you select one and it's balanced by the forced selection of another. So the resulting selections feed manifestation. So this selection manifestation is predetermined. And we can effect that by choosing the peace dome of intention. So this range transition affects standard folding deviation, as we've seen in the creation of the wave, with the ping pong ball moving. So this y-axis transition tuning comes from that hidden seat of power, comes to and from the peace dome. And that's the plasma perspective. So yeah, knowledge and wisdom can give you deeper insight. Experience will change a man's perspective, though. And factually, misconduct becomes harder to rationalize. pH balance becomes perspective balance. So when you're looking at the pH graph, you see there are many points on the perspective scale. So when you're looking at the periodic table of elements, each one is a manifestation of a combination. And when you choose one, you choose the other. And as long as you keep choosing one, you get the other. So each element is produced in its place based on nearness and proximity. And so that's the pH of peace as well. Where do we position it? The pH of peace is seeking balance. But that balance doesn't come from just sitting and idly watching the world go by. Understand that the balance is a coming together of two different fields, and you choose one and you get the other. And these are the lessons that we're learning as part of the transmutation preparation sessions. And coming up very shortly on June 21st is the 6th of the set of 6 preparatory sessions on learning how to transmute and go into outer space. And this is only the beginning. So we are calling out for the space plasma research teams to come together and truly put man in outer space, not with the fake science that we have been seeing, because now we're in the post-March 15th era where we can make choices, a new selection process to go from that bountiful space we call Earth space to that wonderful transmutation space we call outer space, and back, and all places in between, which are always that graceful space as part of our inner space. And that's the space of the greater oneness. And for 541 weeks in a row, we produced the Knowledge Seekers Workshop to transcend the limitations of nuclear science. And we keep teaching and teaching, because this is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. Welcome all the beautiful knowledge seekers learning about the new selection process of the new plasma science. There's a World Peace Treaty. It's harder to rationalize, isn't it? Sign it. Sign it with a pen. Sign it with your soul. And sign it in earnest. And you'll see that man is the reactor of a three-dimensional universe, where man can find heaven through the field transition. And man can go into outer space without a peace dome. As we mine the transition dimensions of truth, trying to stay within the range of standard deviation of perspective, which means we're accounting for the transition perspective of the physical transmission dimensions. So plasma science needs to be delivered daily via the Peace Dome in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. And that's the end of this session. I hope you enjoyed this trip. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex, as well. Very interesting. I think you've generated probably a few questions, but let's open it up to anyone. I also want to thank Roal as well for coming in and sharing his perspective on the feeding. And again, we're learning about our own reactors, this wellness, the travel, the feeding, and probably a few other things like generating energy to allow lights to come on. That's probably another aspect. We know we're full of energies, but very interesting. Does anyone have a question they'd like to ask either of these two gentlemen? Perhaps you thought of something after Roald stopped his presentation you'd like to ask, or something you'd like to ask Alex. You know, Alex, if you were to tell the passengers of the UFO that they've never been in space, they'd probably wonder about you and say, well, come for a ride, we'll take you through space. But are you saying that, or a man has never been in space, but I guess it could apply to the ones in the UFO because they're still in the dimension of the matter state. So if you were to say to them, you've never been in space, would you feel you were correct?
Oh, no, they have been in space.
Okay.
Which space? Okay, what we're talking about is outer space. And the reference that the outer space being the inner space between, or the in-between space between the Earth and the moon, that's not outer space. That's still a physical space. We can send a rocket into that physical space. We can see it. And we can send a rocket into the solar system. We've sent them to Mars and the other planets. We've had flybys for Jupiter and Saturn. So we've sent a rocket there. Those are all part of in-between space. But since it's always physical, the physical is not outer space. It's all an extension of the Earth space, and the Earth space is an extension of the sun space. The sun space and the Earth space share the same physical space. But how do we traverse the universe? And where's the rest of the universal community? So if we see the community as only by what we see, and we see the leading scientists and the fantastic equipment that we have where we can see deep into space, but we can't see the dark side of the moon, which is the nearest space. It's kind of strange. It's just like, it'd be just like you can't tell me what your neighbor looks like, but you can tell me what's going on the other side of the planet. It doesn't make sense. I think we learn about our Earth space first, then we learn about the in-between space, and now we have to learn about the outer space. There is a difference because there's a whole world out there that we don't know much about, except for the fact that we were born. Never forget that. Over to you, Mark.
So you would say they're basically just moving the soul within the physicality. They haven't gotten to the point of expanding the soul. Is
Right.
Mhm. But I'm quite impressed. I mean, you see them in the sky, you see them in the telescopes, perhaps. I know NASA has some videos of things they've tried to shoot at regardless. But yes, I think I would agree they're still in the dimension of physicality, as Mr. Ketch said. They're using a fancier magnetical gravitational positioning system, but they're using matter state reactors. And of course, the creator doesn't travel with ships. He's traveling in the dimension of the energy. So perhaps that's true. Anyone else want to bring something up while you're debating whether to open your mic or not? I had heard that the planets were aligning, but they're not really aligned. It's just from our perspective, it appears we're on the same elliptic. And it appears that they have lined up, but actually they haven't actually lined up. Any comment on that? In a straight
Well,
line.
well, certainly, well, to see them, they all have to be within range of your vision, right? So they are all orbiting around their field. And so we have overlapping fields. So it just so happens that that position on the overlapping fields coincides. And then the question is, so what? Because up until they come together, they are coming together. And up until the point that they have aligned, they're passing away. So the point of alignment is just a point. It's here, it's gone, it's an instant. Everything else is either coming to or going away from. But since, they see the planets going around, well, the going eventually becomes the coming, doesn't it? And so that's how they base the science, that the only thing that changes is the direction. And then as that direction is changing, that is determining the past and the future. Well, that's fine. That's fine if, you're on your Earth plane. But what if you're on Jupiter's plane? And how do you get on Jupiter's plane? Oh, well, I can, take a physical rocket and go from the Earth to Jupiter. Really? Well, it's possible. I'm not saying it's not possible. It is possible. However, we would have to do that in the physicality. Well, why didn't we do that when we were born? Why did we choose the Earth space? So there was a reason for that, right? And that's our field. The Jupiter's on another field, and these fields are overlapping. So the question then becomes is, where is the accounting for jumping from one field to another field? Because it's not visible. It didn't come from the physical space. It came from outer space. The determination for the physical space came from outer space. So it only stands to reason that if we want to change space, then we have to go into outer space and then pick our place. But we didn't pick Jupiter. There must be another place as beautiful as Earth, and that's our place.
Okay. I didn't realize there was a plane on Jupiter. It's just a little funny.
You couldn't pass that one up.
To go back to Roald for a moment there, maybe a year ago or more, Mr. Kesh mentioned this intermittent feeding, and I picked up on that. And I was practicing between 3 in the afternoon and 9 at night. and it's been working, but I sort of went back to whenever I'm hungry, or if I am hungry, I'll have something to eat. I know my mother encouraged 3 meals a day, and it was important to have these. But then I heard an old Indian, somebody was expressing that their philosophy was they didn't eat unless they were hungry. And that's the what I've been taking that up for a while, but I noticed that I went through that intermittent feeding stage for maybe about 6 months or so, and I found it quite effective. Again, lost a little weight, maybe gained a little weight, nothing dramatic, but I did notice that the amount of food I was consuming was reduced. And a lot of people, you can find intermittent feeding or fasting on the internet, and they'll give you some techniques about doing this. So I just thought I'd share that with you, but that's just another step in a progression of steps to get to a higher understanding or to work on this absorbing fields. As I said, when you went through the feeding system that's offered at the store, I mean, it's out of stock actually. It'll probably come back into play. There was no pain or no fighting anything. It was somehow there was a satisfaction there. And it could be because of the fact that this plasmatic water was created in the mouths during one of those sessions as a small gift, I think. A number of people experience almost like salivating way more than you normally would. And Mr. Kesh was saying about it's actually plasmatic water, it's not really saliva. And you can use that to, in a way, change salinities and absorb different things. So I just wanted to say the intermittent fasting is a step for people to work on. And if I was only feeding from 3 in the afternoon till 9, that's about 6 hours. So I reduced my time of feeding by about 75%, even though I may not have overall reduced a tremendous amount of calories, but the time of feeding was reduced. Anything you want to comment on that about?
Maybe I can add something, which is really nice, that if you start intermittent fasting and you skip like breakfast, then you get the hunger feeling that we've learned, the grumbling of your stomach. And we've learned that it's a hunger feeling and then you have to eat. But actually it's more like it's your intestines are cleaning itself. And that's what you hear when it's cleaning itself. And then we learn, oh, let's put in some more food. But actually the last thing you should do is put in more food, because your body's like, hey man, what are you doing? Because I'm cleaning now. And if you just know that in your brain, like, okay, that's not a hunger feeling, it's a cleaning feeling, and just you have to reprogram your brain thinking it was hunger, but it's not, something different. So then it's easier to to ignore it actually, or to just accept it, because it's not hunger, it's something different. And that's, it gets easier.
So,
And after an hour, it just, of like maybe after half an hour, it just goes away.
so that's a detoxifying process you're hearing?
I don't think detoxifying, but more like
Cleaning. You said
cleaning, yeah.
cleaning.
Cleaning the intestines. Well, like I understand, before I learned that everything is mush inside, maybe GANs, I don't know, but if we're still thinking about
Yeah.
intestines and guts, then it's just cleaning the guts and the bowels, bowels,
Yeah, yeah, the bowels, yes, the large intestine, the small intestine, yeah.
Yeah. So, and if you just ignore it, or just know that it's not hunger, then you can not eat. And if you just also say to yourself, okay, but I have plenty of energy, then you will have plenty of energy. And then you can just, yeah. And when that's all done, when the digestion is all gone, then your body can go into what your body was actually made for. Is so cleaning the almost dead cells in your body, just getting rid of that and making new ones, and
Okay,
you
yeah.
get healthier. That's what intermittent fasting is for, actually. far as I know.
I can add something in here.
Hello, Selena.
Hi, Mark. uh, um, um, I analyze about the hunger. I think most of time we eat because of the emotional eating. We feel hungry because of our emotion and overthinking. Did you ever find or look for, if we do the math, when we used to go to school, college, and if we do a lot of math, uh, and after math class, we have to eat something. We feel hungry, right? We use a lot of brain power.
Because you're using so much energy. Okay.
So in the regular time, our mind always thinking about something, right? It's the like physical thing. Most of people do. Most of people, every people do. Some people more and some people less, like that. So when we think a lot, thinking like we tell ourselves the monkey mind, right? So we are constantly thinking this and that happening to us. So that way we lose our energy, and then we feel hungry too. I find out that thing, and then and the other time, I've told you all about my lot of experience in different side. There is no hunger, there is no thought. Their life is different. That time is totally like life is different. Nothing, no emotion like now, like Earth, like us. So total calculation, I find out mostly our hunger is coming from the emotion and overthinking mind.
And habit too, right?
Yes, that is true.
As
So
Miss-
not
as
only
Mi-
one
yeah,
problem.
Yeah, as Mr. Kesh said, the professor is using a lot more energy than the stonemason. Even though you would wonder, how could the professor use much more energy than a guy lifting bricks or rocks and putting them together as a wall all day? But apparently the brain uses much more energy than the physicality does. Go ahead.
Yeah, that is the point. That is all I find out. So I want to add that. So I did.
Mhm.
So we can try not to think over a lot of things. We can do meditation, right? And then not to think about everything, and just reduce thoughts, and then get energy from the universe. Of another thing we can do, that is if we try to relax and not only mind, body too, like lose our body, feel relax every cell, and then I think so that way we can take energy from the universe too, sun too,
Mhm.
from our skin. We can try that too.
Definitely, definitely. We know all these vortexes. This is where the majority of the energy is coming in and through the breathing. And as Mr. Kesh said, most of the problems with the physicality is what we put in our mouths. And it's not only the food, we put other things in our mouth too. So when you can reduce that, I had just happened to read a week ago about this antimony. And this is a heavy white metal that's used in the process of making plastic bottles. And in California, for example, the amount of antimony, ANTIMONY, something like that, And the water in California, they allow 1 part per billion. Now, if you have a Coca-Cola drink in a plastic bottle, somehow that leaches out some more antimony, and you go to 2 parts per billion, which is above the level of the legally allowed antimony in the water. But I guess because it's a soda, it doesn't classify it as a water. So therefore, they allow that. But yes, many of the problems we have in our structure are what we feed ourselves. We know about the carryover of the pesticides and the other things, even into the baby food, that cannot even be processed out during the manufacturing process. So when you start feeding more off the fields, I think you're going to have a more energetic, healthier, and more vibrant structure. Go ahead, Roll.
Yeah, maybe I can add something what
Sure.
Selena said, because it's really that's really true, that the food and the emotion, like when we learn at the retreat with the pranic living, is that well, actually eating food is a addiction. And when you eat, he calls it, if you eat you get a plus, you know, like a plus in the feeling, like, oh yeah, okay, I'm eating, so I'm getting a plus.
Elevated. Yep.
Yeah, because there's a lot of stress going on. Everybody has some kind of stress or trauma or something they just don't want to think about. So then when they start thinking about it, they eat, and then they feel happy, and then your body is busy, and then you're not thinking about that. So then it's an addiction to get the plus. So if you stop eating, it's really hard, because the negatives are still coming up, but you cannot get the plus from the food because you want to stop eating, right? So yeah, to make stopping with eating easier, then yeah, you have to do your inner work as well, like find your traumas and
Right.
fix them.
Right. That's what Mr. Kesh was saying to one of the knowledge seekers when they stopped eating for 16 days. And but Mr. Kesh says it's not only the stopping of the eating, it's to learn how to absorb more fields at the same time. So there's a double process in a way going on here, in the Kesh Foundation anyway.
Yeah, and what I found is that because like I only into the plasma science for 3 months maybe, then, and before that it also worked just by believing it works. So if you just know you can do it, like the fact that you are programmed to think that if you don't eat you lose weight. If you just lose that program, you won't lose weight. If you just know and believe that you can feed from the prana that was before, you know, like we called it the prana, then it eventually it will start happening. And now I know it's the plasma fields which is feeding us. But yeah, in well, in the end, it doesn't matter what you call it, just that it works.
Right. And this weight loss business is a multi-billion dollar industry in the world, where people, for vanity reasons, or maybe sometimes for health reasons, they need to lose weight. But it seems like it's a roller coaster. They have to force themselves not to eat. They're frustrated with this. They're hungry all the time, and it doesn't. And then when they come off the diet, they've again gotten down to the weight or close to the weight. They go back to their regular program, and the weight goes right back on. They're not, many people keep this roller coaster battle going, and there should be a better solution. I think the Kesh Foundation has it with the headphones and the feeding system that they've been testing and working with, that you're really satisfied. Even your stomach feels full. I've experienced this, and I think others have as well.
I think like losing weight shouldn't be a battle, right? If you do like a diet, then it's almost it is a battle, right? It's like, oh, okay, I won't eat this, I won't eat that, and if I do, then I get frustrated at myself again, and then I just quit it after 2 weeks because I can't do it, and I'm such a loser and
And
stuff.
I'm grumpy and I'm
Yeah.
arguing with other people and my personality, my emotions just go totally out of balance.
Yeah, yeah. Just set your intentions and your well. Um, you just be nice to yourself when you go there, and when you mess up, it's okay. Just do again tomorrow.
Mhm.
Try to do better, and if it doesn't work, then it's okay. Also, it's always okay if you just have your goal and your intentions, and
Right.
just always be nice.
Yeah, as we hear from Mr. Kesh, we're not afraid to fail.
Exactly.
Back to Alex, for a minute. You said you can't imagine what it's like to live a life and never knowing about the process of creation. And I'm thinking, isn't the way most of humanity, isn't this the way they've lived their lives? They were born, they know they're going to expire, they work a job or they do this and have a family and get the house and the car and the grandkids, and but they've never understood the process of creation. You said you can't imagine what that would be like, but I think this has been the rule rather than the exception. And as we've heard from Mr. Kesh, that if they don't know, then it's like ignorance is bliss. They've never known what they didn't know. Any comment on that?
Well, I don't have to imagine it because I experience it.
Not you, but I'm saying the majority
Oh.
of the citizens born on this planet and have gone through the process and have left, they've never realized any of this.
Well, I'm part of that group. I have not realized, and I don't understand it. I mean, it wasn't until I came to the Kesh Foundation that I found out where the soul resides.
Absolutely.
Because,
Yep.
you know, I have grown up to rely on others who have more experience, more knowledge, and I respect that. And that's where the problem begins, because when I turned 40, I got the rudest knowledge in insofar as those who I respected and trusted their knowledge and everything let me down. And I said, well, okay, you're the expert, but you don't know. So, so what does that mean then? There are no experts? Is that what that means? And at that point in time, I guess that opened the door for me to actually find an expert. And so this is what happened to me in 1991. I found how to cure cancer. And of course, nobody wanted to know, and it wasn't allowed to talk about it. So, you know, I basically gave up until I came back with the Kesh Foundation, and I seen, well, what can we do about it? And if the answer is nothing, then this is what we have on social media right now. The situation with a lot of people, they give commentary, and all of them come to the same conclusion. Things are not well on this planet. Well, I don't need 100 people telling me that things are not well. I need people telling me how to make them better. And what I've found in the process is that I have the reassurance that I'm part of that process as well. So in summary, I'm not part of the, try not to be part of the problem and trying to be part of the solution. And so this becomes my life goal. And how can, you know, one little tiny piece of the pie be, you know, impact on the rest? Well, the secret's in the thimble. There's enough energy in the thimble to power the universe. And they knew it. And they said it. And they published it. And yet we don't practice it in our practical life. That's where the problem comes in. So what we're trying to do with the teaching, and it doesn't matter how many years you've been here and how many years you've been teaching, we are all teachers. But we are all teachers as well as salesmen. Because we not only have to sell ourselves on the notion, but it isn't smoke and mirrors, it's substance. It isn't superficiality, it's substance. And that substance is not physical. That substance is plasmatic. And the sooner we understand that that is the solution, the sooner everything else will happen in our lives so much better. Back to you, Mark.
Yeah, I remember when Mr. Kesh said if they were going to use food, because there's just a few families who control most of the grains and other things on this planet. He said if they were going to use food to create mayhem, that he could take 1 grain of rice and feed the entire planet. Again, plasmatically, but what a deep, deep knowledge. And we heard that with the metal as well. As you said, the scientist said the thimble has enough energy in it to feed humanity. Remember when Mr. Kesh said just in 1 piece of metal, there's enough energy in there to feed, if you could release it, if you knew how to release it, to feed the entire planet. Just what's holding a small piece of metal together, the energies that are in there isn't more than enough to feed the entire population on this planet. So this is not a dream anymore, and it's been demonstrated in Gaza. I'm sure you've heard of that as well, for those who are interested in food, and we've had some dining experiences as well. But now we're moving into so the feeding is not totally settled, but we've gotten an aspect of understanding of it. And now we're moving further into the transmutation. So we have such a beautiful dynamic system that, again, it can feed you, it can provide wellness, travel, and most likely energy down the road as well. But in the meantime, we'll be using part of the Kesh systems being developed or are developed to learn more in detail how this process actually works. As he said, in those sessions coming up, there'll be some probably more secrets, again, opened up in public and in private of this process.
May I add something?
Well, anybody can, sure, you don't have to ask.
It's June the 9th. This feeding program in Gaza started on March the 4th. So let's recount the month of March, April, May. That's 3 months. And we're talking about feeding, and when we're talking about the regular people historically have been trying to eat 3 meals a day, at least in North America, okay? And so over the last 100 days, that would be 300 meals missed. I would say that there's a sense of urgency in the feeding. You know, it isn't a fasting, it isn't a cleansing, you know, it isn't a, maybe go for a few days without eating. It's 100 days. And no one seems to be very upset about it, except for the people in Gaza. And I think this is the thing that everybody has to pay attention to. Where is that sense of urgency? And it's a lot of fun to talk about it. It's a lot of fun to make commentary, get those clicks on YouTube, right? But hunger and starvation are not fun exercises.
Absolutely. And
Thank you, Alex.
And it wasn't only feeding that is happening there. in this demonstration in public to test the technology for future disasters. But as he said, we're delivering plasmatic water, we're delivering antibiotics, we're delivering painkillers, and especially, he said, we're delivering emotional balancing for those who've lost their families, their homes, their position there, and everything else. So it's not only the feeding that's been encompassed in this process. It again, antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, painkillers, and emotional balancing, in addition to the water and the food that's being tapped into, if we could put it that way. Yes, Selena.
Yeah, thank you, Alex and Mark. I want to say something. A few weeks ago, listen closely a little bit. A few weeks ago in Bangla teaching, I was laughing and telling everybody, I want to put Mr. Netanyahu's picture in my living room, a big picture. I want to hang, but I can't because nobody wants, right, to see. So same kinds of stuff I told like 1-2 years ago about Mr. Trump. I told in Bangla teaching, Mr. Trump lived in my heart, inside my heart. So Shweta asking me why you are keeping that guy inside your heart. So I told her so I can watch him. So I can influence him. But now I want to take that the other guy into my heart, inside my heart. So I can't. How can you put those kinds of people inside your heart? We
Oh,
say,
your heart is big enough. I sense your heart is big enough to accommodate both for nourishment, for nourishing them. And in that process, you become nourished. Yes.
yeah. So to take that in that position, I have to be ready. If I say, oh, I put them in my heart, no, that way it won't happen. I have to accept them really inside my heart. When I used to see Mr. Trump's picture in the TV, so I used to tell, oh, he looked like a child. He acts like a child. He talks like a child. So that way, slowly, I love him more and more and more. So I can take him inside my heart. So same processing I'm trying to do with other guy. So not in the mouth. If I say, oh, I accept him, or I'm gonna take him in my heart, or I want to elevate him and this and that. No, there is a process. There is a acceptance. So each of us, we can love him enough to keep inside our heart, and then we can order him what to do, or his my wish is my command. That time we can say. That's it.
Yes. Okay. And you mentioned something in passing rather quickly. You said the Bengal teaching. Would you tell us? I think you're mentioning the public teaching in Bengali, and this is on every Saturday. It's open to the public, as I understand.
Yes.
And
Uh,
what time, Central European time, is that Bengali meeting?
I don't know, but I
Okay.
can say I can find out
You-
later. But
Your time. What time is it
my
in your
time,
time?
8:30 a.m. in the morning.
8:30 a.m. Okay, so that would probably bring it to about 2:30 Central European Time, something like that. And you can see that on the schedule, or perhaps it's posted in some of the social medias. And MOSFEC, I think, conducts that. And I've been there. Dean said he had a very enjoyable time. I think it was Dean, where he went into the Bengali meeting. Was it Dean? If you
Mm,
maybe you weren't there. But
somebody else, I think so. Thank you.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, thanks. Thanks. Yeah, somebody, and I've enjoyed that as well, on at least one occasion.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm. Any other thoughts, questions? Somebody would like to bring up or discuss?
Mark,
Yes.
I would like to just tell a little story.
Okay, we like that. This is the way the prophets and many teachers teach, including Mr. Kesh, using allegories and stories and
No,
parables
no,
and
no.
things.
This is a real story.
Okay, okay,
This happened to me, and what's interesting about this is that you know your experience changes your perspective, right? And I really didn't understand this, and as I was putting this presentation together, this story came to my mind because uh, I was in a meeting and I was selling a service to a client, and something happened where another group came in, a competitor, and they started to, shall we say, uh, reduce my business. And they were huge, and I was just like a pimple. So, you know, I didn't have much clout, and so I just did my share of the project, and every week we had a review with the client, and it was a national account, and there were about a dozen people in on the meeting, and I attended that dutifully every week, reporting my progress. But at the same time, I would listen to everybody else's progress. And the 1 week I couldn't attend, and I announced that I was going to miss next week's meeting. And would the customer excuse me from that meeting? And they kind of looked at the schedule and what was on tap, and I said, okay, you know, that'd be fine with us. Do what you have, and then come back the following week, and you can catch up. You know, it's not that much of a problem. Have you ever gone to a class and you know, that class, let's say like today's is exceptionally long, but you know, it's full of information. And let's say you go to a class and someone comes late, and they come into the class and they kind of whisper at you, "What did I miss?" And you kind of look at the clock and you say, "Well, you're an hour late." I'd say you missed an hour's worth of class, you know. But they want in just a couple of whispers to tell you what they missed in that hour. That's not possible. You know, you know, I'd have to take a whole hour to explain to you what you missed.
yeah. Mhm.
So I come back the following week, and I didn't have to ask that question, you know, because that would be an obvious question. So what did I miss? You know, you missed the whole week's session. So anyway, as I sit down, the one next to me, and he happened to be a representative of IBM. And of course, IBM was massive, right? And actually, they were the largest group at in terms of corporate size at the meeting. And you know, he liked my work, and I was just, like I say, a pimple. So, you know, he sat beside, he didn't mind sitting beside me. You know, there was no shame in that. I mean, whoever he sat beside would have been, you know, smaller in stature. So anyway, he says, Alex, just sit there and don't say anything and just look pretty. I thought, well, how am I going to do this? So a lot of thought crossed my mind, and I looked at my shoes, and I had a little dust on my shoes, even though that's under the table. No one can see that, but I dusted my shoes, and I straightened out my tie, and I just, you know, ran my fingers through my hair, making sure that, you know, I guess I want to look pretty. I don't know how a man can look pretty, but anyway, I tried to do my best, and then of course I had to straighten out my eyebrows, right? So, I mean, that would have been the icing on the cake. And I sat there and I looked pretty. And my competitor came under fire. And I didn't have to say anything. The customer was so angry at my competitor that it turned into a shouting match. Did you see on the news a week ago that there was a massive shouting match between the UAE and the Palestinian executive? Anyway, it was that kind of shouting match. It was loud. It was abusive. The customer, who's always right, of course, was turning red with anger, almost spitting at my competitor. And I'm just sitting there and trying to look pretty. I'm not saying anything. I'm doing absolutely nothing. I'm just sitting there. And at the end of the meeting, there was a lot of shuffling going on. And I kind of looked at the guy from IBM and said, I see what you mean. And he says, yeah, you did a good job. I said, I didn't do anything. Okay. As I was leaving the meeting, I was grabbed by the customer and I was given one of the largest paydays I've had in my life. And I didn't understand how things happened at that time, because what I had seen was the payday, not only for me, but for the company that I worked for. And I seen that as a real benefit to the customer, because that's what they wanted. But as it turned out, in hindsight, it was the beginning of the end of my career at that company. Because what had transpired, because I sat there and did nothing, I won this major contract, which I had to work really, really hard for. And I did a lot of stuff, but here I did nothing. And it was amazing. And I didn't understand it. And I understand it now. I understand what happened. It was all done on the soul level. What I was working towards was the physical supply and delivery and coordination and all that. And just through, I missed one meeting. I missed that one meeting in all the years that I did this, and I missed one meeting. And I came back and I was given this. And it's just, I think about it now, and I said, well, how did I do that? I wonder if the fact that I straightened my eyebrows was, you know, the answer. But of course, that's all in jest. The reality of it was that there was activity in the background which was going on without my intervention. And I became the benefactor of that. Is because instead of forcing the issue, shall we say, getting into a conflict with the competitor, I just basically let the competitor self-disintegrate. And on that contract, even though it was a smaller part of that contract, the profit margin was way higher. And there was no problem with that, because what was the problem was the delivery and the service, and I provided that. And it's just interesting when you look at that and you say, well, I didn't do anything, and yet there was a massive movement. And so this is the thing that we have to understand. There are events at play on this stage, this earth space, of people doing things which are forcing the matter. And the problem is that they're forcing the matter and telling the universe to shut up. And they are violating universal laws, and they know who they are. So if we want to participate with the universal community, then we have to come to grips with reality. You cannot violate the universal laws. So when it comes to man-made laws versus universal laws, we have to understand that the inalienable rights that we have are God-made, not man-made. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, interesting. Let's take a question from the chat.
Thank you.
Yes. Did you want to add something, Selena?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Someone's saying here, well, we know who. It's right there in the chat. Just got back from ER. How can I get swimmer's ear when the last time I was in the ocean was 2016? I know I used to be a competitive swimmer, maybe from the ages of 9 to 14, and sometimes we'd have 2 and 3 hour practices, summer and winter. One was for the boys club and the other was for the parks department. But I used to get a little bubble sometimes in my ear. And as you tilted your head from left to right, you could almost hear that water rocking within the ear, and you kind of have to force your head or snap it a little bit to see if that bubble would come out. But you could definitely tell there was water in the ear. And I'm thinking, well, I ended up wearing some earplugs, and swimmers do that sometimes. But I was thinking just from this question that perhaps in the shower, some water had gotten into the inner ear, or maybe you just got an ear infection and they call it swimmer's ear. Any comments from anyone on that question? Anything you'd like to add to that, Randy? Was it a regimen of antibiotics, or did they siphon the water out? How did they handle that? He may not be able to hear me. No, hopefully he can. No problem. He may not be close to the microphone. But yes, it is quite annoying as you turn your head or tilt it toward your left shoulder, then towards your right shoulder. You can definitely feel the water in the ear. And then when it came out, it was always warm. So somehow a little bubble or something blocks it from getting in there. But I experienced that. Never had any infections, but I would always have to work sometimes a day or two to get that little water out of my ear. It's quite annoying. Switching to the earplug solved that problem for me.
There is internet bad connection. I didn't hear a lot, but in Bangladesh, in the village, people when they swim in the river or lake, if the water goes to the ear, people do take more water and then put in their ear, and then they
connect it.
Yeah, and then they do something. They what is that? The name? They
irrigate the ear.
Yes, and then they'll jump, and then the water come out.
Okay, that's a different way of doing it. But yes, there's many ways to solve problems.
Yeah, in the village, yeah, they do.
Mhm.
I don't know. It is not a solution.
Okay.
I just
And since you brought up this pH perspective, Alex, I create a solution of 9. I use my pH meter. I'm reading 9, and you're saying that the 5 is in there. Is the 5 also alkaline or base? Because you said it has to add up to 14, or
No, the 5 is acidic.
the 5 is acidic. So how come it doesn't show itself? Because I've
Well,
created
you
a
think-
9. Where is the 5?
That's a good question. That is a really good question.
I think a lot of people are asking this. You keep saying you create 6 and you also have the 8. Well, where is it? If my meter is showing me a 6, then I think I have a pristine solution of 6. But you're saying the 8 is there, but it's not showing itself? It's not showing its face?
In physicality, are you only doing the pH based on what you see? What changes the pH? If you're determining a 9, how do you do that? Why did you determine 9 and not 8?
Well, I don't know. Something said I needed to, whatever, I'm running an experiment which calls for a 9 pH solution. So I take my meter and I adjust it. I use a little bit of alkalinity and I boost it up to 9. Okay, I have a 9. Where is the acid to, I just, this is.
Just a moment.
Okay,
Did you just say you boosted it up?
I did.
Okay, so it must have been consumed, right? Your booster must have been consumed.
Well, it becomes part of the whole solution, I would imagine. It's elevated the whole um, test tube or canister, whatever you're working with.
Okay, so let's look at the pH of water specifically. So if you were going to raise the pH of water, you can do this chemically, right? Say add calcium carbonate to the water. Now, is that calcium now still calcium and water, or is it in solution with the water?
I would think it would be in solution with the water, but I could be wrong, but.
No, of course it is, because you're taking the pH of that water, and so now you're seeing the product of the two coming together. So to make the water alkaline, then the calcium needs to be less alkaline, doesn't it? If you're going to maintain a balance. Now, take the same thing, instead of doing it chemically, do it through electrolysis. So if I create, and I say I start with neutral water, and I want to create alkaline water, and I create a pH of 8, then there has to be a discharge of water. That discharge water will be a pH of 6. You're gonna force me to give a brand name, so I'm gonna do that. If you have a Kangen machine and you want to produce alkaline water through electrolysis, you can select the pH, and then in the discharge water, you will get the corresponding pH that will total 14. So you can create a pH of 8, you'll get 6 on the discharge. You want a 9, you'll create 5 on the discharge. You want to create strong alkaline water at 11.5 to emulsify fat, you're going to get a pH of 2.5 on the discharge. which will be antibacterial.
When you say the discharge, does that mean that leaves the environment?
No, you have water coming in, and if in order to make that water the higher pH, you have to split the water into two. So you have one hose coming in and two hoses coming out.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that process. But
It's
interesting.
electrolysis.
Mm.
It's electrolysis is the splitting up of water. So you if you get the pH of one and on the one side, and you get the pH of the other on the other side, there's always a balance, and the pH always comes to 14. So you can regulate that. So there's two ways to physically change the pH of water, chemically and through electrolysis, both of which are in the physical state. Okay, but there is a third way, and that's done plasmatically. So I can change the pH of the water. And then I've done this. I've taken acidic water that I took out of the Kangen machine and put it next to the plasma reactor. And
Yeah.
within a period of time, it elevated the pH. It didn't do it chemically. It didn't do it through electrolysis. It did it plasmatically. Okay. Where is the offsetting energy? Where is it? It's in the plasma universe, isn't it? Because the physical alkalinity of the water is in the physical universe. That's the point. So plasmatically, I elevated the pH of the water, but there was a consumption of energy to do that because the elevation of the water becomes more complex. It becomes more gravitational. It becomes more stable. It's loaded with more oxygen, and it leads us to the healthy side. We need to have a blood serum pH that is slightly alkaline. So how do we do that? We drink pop with a pH of 2.4, right? And we drink others which have pHs all over the map. And so to offset that, you want to drink alkaline water. And we understand that in an alkaline terrain in the body, that cancer cannot exist. That is common knowledge going back to the 1930s. So that's how it happens. So how does the body become alkaline when we're eating all this acid-forming foods? Well, that's the point. They're forming. They're acid forming. They're alkali forming. What is causing that forming? This magical energy. Where is just coming from where? Is it coming from the chemistry? Is it coming from the electrolysis? Or is it coming from the plasma? So in other words, if we are going to be fed, then we don't need the bulk of the food. We need the energy that's within the binding of the food. So if we can harness the energy from the universe, then we don't need the bulk of the energy of the universe. What is the bulk of the energy of the universe? All these metals in the periodic table of elements. These are all physical bindings. But we don't want to say that as if that's a bad thing. There's no commentary of if that's a good thing or a bad thing. There's a lot to enjoy about the physical universe. But when you start to add abuse to it, what happens? You find psychosomatic conditions come in, right? So you weren't born with those. Those were acquired in the physical universe. This is what I'm saying. So now these psychosomatic conditions, which are not physical, they are causing health issues. And in those process, they make our blood serum terrain more acidic. And so there's the solution. If we focus on the physical problem, we can't win. There's no resolution. There's no conflict resolution. But if we focus on the plasmatic perspective, then we can draw the energy that we need. Well, there's two forms of energy, isn't there? There's a magnetical and a gravitational. So the gravitational needs the source to be fed by the magnetical, and then in turn, the gravitational has to feed. So there has to be a giving. But if we want to maintain a stable relationship, we have to feed first and then take later. But this is a two-way street, and it's instantaneous. So everything that you're looking that has stability has this balance. And it's not neutral, because when it's neutral, it's clear, just like water. Water that's neutral is clear. Water that's polluted has a different color.
Okay, thank you very much. Was there any pH testing, Roald, in your work? Was there any suggestion of checking your pH, or have you checked your urine or saliva? I think those are two ways to see. And Mr. Kesh did say that quite a bit of health can be achieved just by elevating the pH of the structure.
I have not tested anything yet. Yeah, I want to wait some more till I'm more further into the game, you know, and then I will test my blood sugar and everything just to see, because they say if you can take everything out of the fields, then you don't need anything and your body will be perfectly balanced. So yeah, the Brahman guy, he says like when he did test his I don't know what it's called, like values, like his yeah, I think values.
You
They
mean
were all
a blood workup?
yeah, blood workup, like the minerals and the vitamins and the water household in your body. It was all just perfect because your body knows what to do, and if you can get the well, the minerals and the things you need from the fields, then it will be like perfect. So, but I haven't checked yet, but I will.
Right. It'd be interesting to review that story about when Mr. Kesh, and he often refers to it, about when he met this particular guru who hadn't eaten for maybe 40 days or something like that. And of course, Mr. Kesh said, "You're lying. I know your trick." And he said that the guru was able to hold his body in a certain position that would allow the absorption of energies to feed himself. But he didn't reveal that to his followers, apparently, or maybe not even taught it to the followers. But Mr. Kesh said, you know, he understood what the gentleman was doing. And as he said, Mr. Kesh indicated that I can teach you how to put your body and feed yourself in 5 minutes. He said, but it wouldn't really be worth much because your soul is not elevated. And this was the primary concern about the elevation of the soul, rather than just feeding the physicality or the soul of the man. He's looking for an elevation in that area, and not our knowledge of being able just to feed ourselves.
That's a brilliant point, Mark, you just brought up. A couple of weeks ago at the One Nation meeting, One Planet, MOSFAC was doing a teaching, and he was talking about this very point. And even he noticed that the moment he wanted to have a conscious awareness of this transmutation, that at that point it would fail. So it was the willing, how shall we say it, the forceful attention of the transmutation process causes the transmutation process to fail. So, well, what you were discussing and what Roalbert just brought up was that, the body has a balancing and a counterbalancing effect. And so we're able to have a diet that covers a wide variety of pHs, and yet somehow we become very stable inside. And this is the one thing that we keep ignoring. What is that factor that allows us to jump from one to the other and back again? And once we understand that, we'll understand the transmutation process at the same time. It just becomes automatic, and it's not something that we can force in the physicality. Thank you so much for allowing me to present today. What a terrific meeting. Thank you all for participating, and thank you again, Mark, for
Yep,
being the
no problem.
beacon
Coordinator.
Can I add one more thing, Alex? Maybe
Yes,
because
sir.
what when you say what is the key to the balance, and with the well, the pranic living and the maybe even the transmutation is, I think, is the trust. Like the surrendering, the trust, and trust your soul of the man to take over, because it knows how it works and what to do. So that's what I did. I just fully believe that I can do it if I don't do anything, but just believe, and then the soul of the man will take care of the rest with the pranic living that worked. So that it's gonna be my go-to for the transmutation as well. Just give it all up and let it take over.
That's what Mr. Kesh mentioned just a few weeks ago. He said 90% of the reason you're not transmuting is a lack of trust. 10% is the lack of knowledge. So this lack of trust in ourselves, of believing in ourselves, is 90% of the game. That was nice to hear you say that.
That was very nice to hear you say that. I second that, and thank you for being here, Royal. This is what we need. We need more teachers, and there's no pre-qualification, because we all have the knowledge that we were born with, and we just have to think good, do good, and speak good. So thank you all.
Now that you've mentioned the three wise men, and of course this is another mystery that Mr. Kesh has unraveled about the gifts to the Christ child, and they weren't gold, and they weren't oops, let me share the screen here. They weren't incense, and so on and so forth. They were actually this idea of Mitraism is to think good, to speak good, and to do good, but the Christians have all missed it. And this creates a huge amount of shielding and balance in your structure. As I've said before, by thinking good and speaking good and acting good.
And taking the screen?
And I thought I did take the screen. No? Let me just see here. Yes, I have the screen. Okay. But anyway, these three ideas are the gifts from the wise men and all the Christians missed it. It's written right in the holy books about what the gifts were. But again, they were mostly gifts in the physicality. So now we're receiving these gifts in the dimension of the plasma, so to speak. I mean, acting is in the physicality, but the speaking and the thinking, I think, are plasmatic in so many ways, at least the thinking is. And so it creates a huge balance for you, a shielding, as I'm thinking of it, because even if you've been wronged or you felt you've been wronged and you're thinking bad about that person or that soul, you're actually taking from that person, even though that person may not hear you, may not even realize what you're thinking or saying about them. But by thinking good, speaking good, and acting good, you're creating a huge, beautiful balance and creating a lot more serotonin than dopamine in the brain. The taking comes from the with the dopamine hormone, I guess that's, but the giving creates that serotonin. So you have a beautiful shielding mechanism that you can employ around yourself and to keep those emotions balanced, that nothing can really attach to it, because you're always thinking good and you're always speaking good as much as possible. Again, this is easier said than done. We always catch ourselves slipping and whatever, but it's a huge balancing and shielding. And then, of course, we have this other one here, which we like to show. And this was given as a little keychain in, I think it was Manchester and so on. And if you're thinking good and speaking good and acting good, may you be proud of the work you do. May you be proud of the person you are, and may you be proud of the difference you're making. And this applies to all of us. So I want to thank you all for being here, helping to bring the change. Yes, go right ahead.
Yeah, I remember the word tilted the head that side.
Say again?
Forgot.
Wait, missed that. I missed that.
Oh, the word was, I told you, I forgot. That was the tilted the head that side. The water, when water goes to the air,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and then put some water and then tilted the head that side and then jump or try to.
Okay. Very practical.
Sorry about that.
No, very practical solution. It is quite annoying. I mean, some people I've seen them, they're actually hitting the side of their head gently above the ear and trying to shake that water out of there. It can be quite annoying. And again, I don't know how it sometimes gets in there and sometimes there's no problem. What is it that allows that to happen? I don't know. But I've experienced it many, many times. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Selena. And feel free to join the Bengali meeting. It's another beautiful meeting in the public domain, so you're all welcome to be part of that. I'm going to play Keep Keshe Foundation Free for Humanity. And this is the idea, again, of volunteering to be part of these. If we go to the store again, some of these things that are coming up, and especially any of them actually, but the transmutation preparation sessions, which are here, and you can all find it all on the store, which is coming up, and then they'll continue in July, August, and September. If you want to know more details, and some of it will be revealed in public and some of it will be revealed in these sessions. And normally Mr. Keshe doesn't say we can't talk about what's happening in the transmutation preparation sessions, so we can share whatever. But for you to be there and for you to experience it and to keep Keshe Foundation free for humanity is a big part of this process of you volunteering and so on into these trials and these sessions that are being offered by the foundation. Okay, but paying doesn't work yet. Did try to, okay, let's see, it's put in the chat here. Did try to buy transmutation prep sessions for the 21st, but paying doesn't work yet. Okay, well, it does work. It's a matter, again, of the store is a little bit awkward. Apparently, they had a number of webmasters working on it and different things. I think it'll get revised. I know the store is slowly depleting its inventory, and then I think the new manufacturers will sort of be taken over. And maybe they'll streamline the whole process, but it does work. Usually you can send the money, you place your order, you send in the funds through a transfer process like Wise, TransferWise. It used to be their name, now they're just Wise. Or some people use PayPal, but I don't know if that was encouraged or more or less discouraged, because sometimes they hold the client's money for a little bit too long. But it's worked for me, and if I can do it, I think anyone can do it. So you place your order in the store, you send the funds via the wire into the Kesh Manufacturing Austria account, and then you send them an email on top of that, just to confirm that you've sent the money, so that they're aware of it. And they will send you an email, normally the night before the transmutation preparation sessions begin. Okay, so let's see one of the reasons, and of course we'll hear Alex voicing over the first part, and then Mr. Kesh delivering the last part. It's about 7 minutes, if you'd like to hear it, and then I'll play the final disclaimer, and the meeting will come to an end. Any other thoughts, questions, comments, issues, non-issues? Feel free.
I want to remind again, please love that neighbor and keeping him in your heart, and then command.
And you know, Selena, you brought up this idea of keeping a picture of that person you're elevating. Well, you're actually working with the soul of that person. We don't elevate the man, we elevate the soul of the man.
Yes.
But Mr. Kesh has said so many times that looking at a picture, you want to connect to your dead grandmother, a child who's left you, has gone into the next dimension. He said, have a photograph. And he said that photograph is like a telephone number, probably because a trace of the soul is within that photograph. And he says, when you look at that picture, it gives you a direct line of connection to that person. And this is what we're talking about. That's all it is. Your grandmother, your dead grandmother, is probably part of the universal community in that dimension. So we have the ability, and there's a few tricks, as he said, by holding a picture, looking at a picture, it's like a telephone number. You instantaneously connect. And again, some of these connections are not, oh yeah, finally, I've been waiting for you to call me or get in touch with me. It's not like that. It's not overwhelming. Most of the time, it's rather subtle and soft and gentle. And it's not so much comes in with a megaphone or something and, you know, that sort of interaction. So again, these 3 wise men are very important for your overall practices. And again, it's for you to do it. No one else can control your structure except you.